According to leaked video, family members of Russian soldiers are so desperate to find their loved ones that they are actually traveling to the front line themselves. And it sounds like the families of soldiers who are deceased or forcibly mobilized in Ukraine are becoming a real political liability for Putin. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's get into it. Okay, so first I wanted to cite this video from Insight from Ukraine and Russia, who has a great channel, by the way. I encourage you guys to check him out. I'm going to link to the source video below here. But what he has for us is sort of this is the end of his end of the year video. This is a story of a wife of a mobilized soldier who, I'm not going to cover the whole video, but I do want to sort of tell the overview of his story and point out what she did in desperation to find him. So again, what I find interesting is that she gives her name. She says, I'm a real person alive, but notice what else she says. She says, I'm not an agent of any intelligence service. And this is a sign of the fact that one of the tools, of course, Russian propaganda has used to dismiss their critics is to say that they are plants or members of Ukrainian or CIA shills, right, who are telling fake stories. I mean, remember, officially Russia says they've only lost, I think, like 6,000 troops in Ukraine. So the remaining 300,000 are technically off the books, which means they're being hidden not just from the official statistics, but from family members as well. So she discusses that her husband was mobilized over a year ago and sent to the Crimea, what I call the Crimea-Lyman axis, what they call the Svatovo-Crimea area. So this is an area that has not been some of the heaviest fighting, but of course then she reports that he was injured, right, treated, and then after his injury, in April 2023, he was returned to the front lines to Zaporizhzhia, which is itself, here we go, in August to counter the Russian counteroffensive, right? So, and even she knows that's where the counteroffensive was concentrated. She lost touch with him. He wasn't able to communicate for over a month. And so here's where things get crazy. Right after a month, he came out from the front line. We got in touch, but she was so desperate. Remember, this was by August. He had been mobilized over 12 months with no leave or ability or really no light at the end of the tunnel at all. There was no movement towards ending this mobilization. And in desperation, Maria here actually went to the Zaporizhzhia region. Yep, she went to Berdyansk to try to find her husband. This was around the new year, right? So very recently. Tragically, she is now in Berdyansk, and finally, not members of his unit, right? Not even the official Russian military command, but members of his unit, right? She learned that he had been killed in action. She doesn't really know exactly when or what happened, but she's out here on social media really saying that they should not serve. I mean, look at what she's saying. She's discouraging other Russian service members from serving at all. She's saying you should desert, you should run away, right? She says she really thought she was coming to, remember, Russia considers Zaporizhzhia to be sovereign Russian territory. But even she sits there and says, our loved ones are dying for nothing. And I think this is really illustrative of the fact that for Putin, the level of casualties is probably the biggest political liability for this conflict. Remember, the Soviet conflict in Afghanistan lasted over 10 years, and it was seen as so pointless and devastating to the Soviet families that fought there, that the war was believed to have contributed directly to the downfall of the Soviet Union. And in that 10-year conflict, 15,000 Soviet soldiers are believed to have been killed. For perspective, the number in Ukraine is between 150,000 to 300,000 KIA Russian soldiers. So an absolutely eye-popping number are fighting in this conflict at a rate that's just absolutely stunning. And so I point this out because even Putin seems to be aware that even though his his election is a sham, the risk of elections that he seems to perceive is that when you have an election, it's an opportunity for everyone to ask questions like, what is this government doing exactly? When I go to vote, you ask, okay, well, technically I need to, I can only vote for Putin, but what is Putin doing for me exactly? And even he's starting to realize that he's really got to find a way to deal with this massive political problem of casualties. So ahead of his election, he's actually been meeting with the family members of deceased Russian servicemen. This was as of yesterday. Now, Putin is not a democratic leader, and this was a ultra stage managed event. They identified that many of the family members were pre-selected and were selected simply because they are known to have strong ties to the Russian government and military-industrial complex. So there's very little chance that they are going to speak out openly to Putin against the war. Some of them actually head the Committee of Families and Soldiers. So others are a head of branch heads of things like the Defenders of the Fatherland Foundation, right? Some family members are actually church members at the official church of the Russian Strategic Missile Forces. So I'd say this because obviously Putin isn't going to actually take real questions or really get questioned about what are Russia's primary strategic interests in Ukraine. But what he wants to do is be seen as a leader who is sympathetic and aware of the fact that he's incurring massive, massive casualties. And the ultimate billion-dollar question that Putin isn't able to answer is why. Right? He talks in vague terms about something called a Ruski Mir or a pan-Russian project. He talks about sort of the need to diminish the threat that Ukraine poses, but clearly Ukraine doesn't pose a threat, right? Like Ukraine, at this point, especially in the war, Ukraine is not going to march to Moscow. Like it's just not in the cards. So when you have this sort of thing, then you've got to ask yourself, what are the Russian people getting for their sacrifice? And this is, I think, core to Ukraine's current strategy, is that it's a two-pronged strategy. On one hand, I think that they're going to try to maximize the amount of casualties Russia takes because Russia no longer has the mechanized forces that are capable of seizing significant swaths of territory. And, I haven't been doing that many map updates lately, and I'll show you why, to give you an example. Here's the map updates for today, right? The enemy, this is Russian forces being pushed back from Novomykhailivka. You can see here that, this looks like a dramatic shift, but it's really just pushed back out of an open field, which very few people are controlling anyway. Right? There's a small Russian advance in Pervomaisk. How small? This small. Again, open fields changing hands, 200 meters of open field, right? You can see in Klachivka here, even more minor, just absolutely tiny, tiny advances. So Ukraine has realized Russia's not going to make some lightning blitz to Kiev in this war. So they've said, okay, our new objective is to maximize casualties. That's the first prong. The second prong, though, is to emphasize to the Russian people that this war is pointless. Pointless. And that's why I think you're going to see more video like what Insight just posted sort of brought to the forefront, right? You're going to hear more Russian POWs talking about the pointlessness of the war, and those videos are going to be pushed into the Russian social media space. You're going to hear more videos about these spouses who've lost husbands, sons, fathers in these conflicts to achieve little of value for Russia. And that, I think, is Ukraine's primary goal and strategy in 2024. Now, if you're interested in seeing uncensored combat footage from the fighting, the only place I can put that is on combatvetnews.com. Twice a week, I drop videos for members that involve the uncensored combat footage. I look at that week's most viral videos. I usually profile a single battle taking place, and we do a deep dive into the tactics, units, terrain that are being fought. Last week, we actually took a look at the battle for Kupiansk in the Ivanevsky region. And it was crazy to see the way that Ukrainian forces were using their terrain to their advantage to absolutely blitz Russian forces. So if you're interested, check us out, combatvetnews.com. And of course, a huge thank you to all the members of combatvetnews.com, especially our colonel tier members, all of our lieutenant tier members, and all the members that make this possible. See ya.